All right, we're on. Okay, so just real quickly, just tell everybody who you are and what you specialize in, and why you're a psychotherapist.
So first off, I just want to thank you so much for having me on the podcast, and I want to commend you on the really important work that you're doing, shining a light for others and
Thank
spreading
you.
psychoeducation about trauma, complex trauma specifically. And I really admire your work, and I hope that you continue. My name is Dr. Gillian O'Shea Brown, and I am a complex trauma specialist. I'm an EMDR approved a certified therapist and approved consultant. And I am a professor of trauma at NYU. And I authored the book Healing Complex PTSD with Springer Publishing in 2021. That was the year that it became a formal diagnosis.
Yeah.
But I also have a private practice that I maintain in New York City. And the modalities that I like to use is a blend of internal family systems, which is ego state therapy, working with your different parts of self, EMDR, somatic techniques, and I'm also a certified yoga teacher. So I use a
Oh, wow.
personalized blend that is unique to each individual because everyone's healing journey is different.
Yeah.
And you asked what got me interested in complex trauma specifically, or why I'm a complex trauma therapist. Back when I first got into this line of work in 2010, I noticed that for a lot of people, their deepest pain came from their experiences in close relationships. And it informed the story they tell themselves about themselves, and that feeling of worthiness or feeling good enough or feeling safe in the world. And as a child, you create an emotional map to determine who you can love and how you'll survive. And we as humans are creatures of habits, so we reenact the same patterns over and over again. And I became deeply interested in going to the root cause of negative core beliefs. And to quote
Right.
Francine Shapiro, the founder of EMDR, we all have 10 to 20 memories in our life responsible for all of the pain. And processing each memory is like taking a log out of the fire. So I take immense joy out of taking the burning logs out of the fire, working through people's past trauma. So then we can work through any present day triggers in their life and then finally pave the way for their future template work. So that's just a quick
Wow.
synopsis of what's brought me to where I am today. I hope that's answered your question.
Absolutely. Excellent. As I was discussing with you before the show started, where I'm living, there's very few people who do this kind of support and therapy work. I think the vast majority of the therapists out here focus more on PTSD and CBT therapy as a lot of their ways of trying to help people.
Yeah.
And yet, as not personally myself, but my ex-partner was one who went through CBT therapy before. I think it was just before we met,
Yeah.
learning about complex trauma and actually starting her therapy in complex trauma. So I learned about it through that.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's the interesting part of like my story,
Mm.
and what, like, I really want people to understand is it's how it's like a book. My story began, and I was probably maybe 10, 20 pages into a 400-page book. And what I thought was the root cause of my own trauma and my own abuse turned out to not be that at all. It was like somebody putting a misled road or a detour and on purpose to avoid their own, like, the truth coming out.
Oh.
So yeah, like it'd be just like someone not wanting you to find their treasure of millions of dollars, so they're gonna try
It's
to lead you away from it.
Is it too intrusive for me to ask for more context, or would you rather?
Absolutely not. No. When I started my relationship, when it started, I already had some understanding from her side that she had been dealing with this, with complex trauma
Mhm.
and her own life, living through abuse and everything. And so about 4 or 5 months into it,
Mhm.
I was starting to experience my own kind of like traumatic triggers,
Yeah.
and it was causing me to to have issues in the relationship. So it was when she would get upset at me, or when something wrong would occur that wasn't like on the road of perfect, everything is perfect, all, all sunshine and no clouds or and storms, i would I'd start to panic and feel closed off, or right, like I would get triggered, and my ability to communicate and to think straight and to understand that I've made a mistake, or that something
Mm.
happened that upset her, I would basically all freeze up and get all clamored up and like get triggered. And so that was the understanding at the time and the belief.
Yeah.
And not long after that, I started seeing my therapist, who I
Yes.
still see today.
Mhm.
Well, until I took my break, of course. But
Mhm.
he there was this whole deep, like, diving into trying to find the root causes and explanations as to why this is happening. And what my instinct was, and my first like my first attempt at trying to figure this out, was going to my past relationship before that,
Your previous
where,
romantic relationship.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I had been with someone who was like very emotionally and mentally abusive,
Okay.
and was very like, it was kind of, it was similar to this. It's just that
Yeah.
it was not to the same degree, and the same like how big it ended up getting. Like, it was really small compared to what ended up happening in my
Oh,
future.
I'm really sorry to hear that. So,
Yeah,
with your romantic partners in your history,
yeah,
you had inadvertently gone from one abusive, controlling partnership to another.
correct.
And then it sounds like what you're also saying, because trauma leaves behind clues, you'd get these present day triggers where there'd be a lot of somatization, where you'd feel frozen,
Yeah,
but then you'd immediately feel like, I am bad, and feel unheard, and coming to voice was really hard. So there was a relational pattern that was forming.
yeah. And we were trying to, what my therapist, and unfortunate, and I wish I hadn't done this with my girlfriend, or my
Mhm.
ex-girlfriend at the time. What
Mhm.
we were all trying to do was trying to find where this really came from, where it started. and and
From
that
you mean from the kind of stance of you accept the love you believe you deserve, and where did I learn that this is what love is? The control, the abuse, the
in a way, like
okay.
I think it was more to where I learned to be, like, avoiding conflict. Like,
Yeah.
I'm really bad at conflict, because I immediately try to avoid it. I try to cover it over, or protect myself, or try to make things right, instead of actually focusing on it and learning from it.
And
Or
how do you avoid and protect yourself from conflict, traditionally speaking?
in the past,
Mhm.
and I guess until recent, more so, it was where I would just, I kind of would just, like, not I wouldn't be able to really communicate, or
Mhm.
be able to be the adult
Yeah.
in the moment. I would become like a child,
Yeah.
or I'd be like that person who's
Mhm.
sitting in a corner and covering his ears and trying to avoid any
Yeah.
kind of contact with the person because he feels that if he disappears or if he runs and hides away, it'll all just go away and then he can move on.
Well, there's two things that come up when you say that. One is that the silence and the shame and the locking into yourself, it is such a cathartic corrective experience for you to come to voice and shine a light for other trauma survivors today and what you're doing. And that's a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Syrian energy there, the wounded healer. Um, but also, I guess, to kind of, what you opened up with was that in the context of those abusive, controlling relationships, the question was, where did I learn this from? And were you
Yeah.
able to discover that, or were you able to?
Well, I was. It's just that I didn't discover the
Mhm.
truth till after the relationship ended.
You discovered a masking memory, but not the
Yeah.
touchstone memory. Yeah, your
Yeah.
unconscious does, it only gives you what you're ready to see.
Exactly.
And sometimes
Yeah.
it gives you a memory, but there's another repressed memory behind it.
Yeah.
Um, which is, as you said earlier, it's like you're uncovering treasure, which I know it's very painful to do, but the unconscious mind will create a protective fog around memories that are too sharp. And
Yeah.
when people get access to repressed memories, it's actually a sign that your tolerance and your self wisdom and your inner power is growing.
Right.
And they reveal themselves to you when you're ready. So, are you comfortable sharing more about the masking memory and the touchstone
Yeah.
memory? Okay.
Yeah. So what what happened over the course of almost 4 years? Because I was with her for nearly 4 years,
Hmm.
and what was happening, and it's unfortunate that I didn't see it earlier, but
Yeah.
I think that's quite common with a lot of people when they're
Hmm.
in an abusive relationship. Is she she was using other aspects of my life,
Okay.
and like I grew up through school, like my entire, like from grade 1 all the way up to the end of high school. I grew up with being bullied and always teased and made fun of, and I never really stood up for myself because I was afraid. Well, I had conflicting parents that one had one resolution and one had a different type of resolution. And I was always under the belief that violence was not the answer.
Hmm.
But the problem is doing any other route, like taking a different route of like going to a teacher or going to the principal and saying these people are constantly bullying and I'm not, I don't feel safe. I can't trust anybody because I don't know if who they are or what they're doing. And all you would think that people would think that was a route to take. And what it ends up doing is it just causes them to, like, and I'm sure everybody has seen this in a movie or a TV show, is when they go and tell somebody about the bully comes back and says, so you told on me, and increases like the bullying or the attack on that person. And I never wanted to become the violent type and fight back because one, my father was the type that grew up in that era and was the one that always believed that, well, if you turn around and you punch them in the face, they're going to leave you alone. And I never really wanted to be that way because one, I was afraid of getting suspended.
Yeah.
And two, I felt like if I did that to one of them, the other four or five would come back at me. So I was in a really tight spot. So yeah, I grew up basically from the age of 6 all the way to 18 dealing with bullying and harassment and
Well, this is an especially painful situation because you have
yeah.
12 years of being bullied and taunted, not by one person, but by a whole gang of people. And
Yeah.
this is a time in your life when you're trying to figure out, who am I? What's my self-worth? Who am I in the world? How do I survive? Who can I trust? And during this time when your personality was really taking shape, day in and day out, there was just a lot of turmoil and emotional abuse. And it
Yeah.
sounds like you kept a lot of that in, and you didn't really have a compassionate witness that felt like a helpful person to take the walk
No.
with you.
No,
And
I didn't.
what you're talking about, it kind of sounds like, in between fight or flight in the animal kingdom, what you'll do if a predator is 3 times bigger on land or by sea is you won't run away and you won't fight them. You'll do the primal surrender. You'll play dead. And for most creatures, this is an autonomic nervous system response that's below conscious awareness. And it's the last line of defense. And it happens to humans too. And it sounds like
Yeah.
a lot of the time during this taunting where you're totally outnumbered, fighting might get you suspended or expelled.
Or
Running
worse.
away, or worse, running away might heighten the aggression. You learned to kind of disconnect and kind of almost disassociate out of your body and get very silent and get very, you know, try to create some kind of a barrier in order to survive. And this happens so often and so frequently that your somatic memory, your body, is actually the most sophisticated and intelligent tool that you'll ever own. And even though sometimes it feels like it's betraying you, it is your friend, and rather than your foe, and it can be your overly protective friend. But it decided that this was the most sophisticated way to keep you safe in the face of intrusion trauma.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was the original, this is where this came from, this fawning, frozen response, or so you thought, because it sounds like then you went deeper and you kept peeling back the layers.
Yeah, exactly. See, the the one thing that was I almost allowed it to drastically change my life
Mm-hmm.
because my she was and this wasn't like a one-time discussion. This was multiple situations where she was getting me to believe that the actual root cause of everything was from my father.
Okay.
And my father, like, and because I'm trying to figure these things out, and I've got her and I've got my therapist, and we're all trying to discuss and get to the bottom of it. And I look at my past and I go, well, okay, yeah, I know that my dad was a little, he's got a very short temper, and he overreacts to things when he gets upset, but he was not the type, like, and this is where I finally understood, is that he may have a bit of a temper and he may overreact, but he was never the type to keep, like, to hold that against you even long after. Like, I know there's a lot of abusive parents out there that are constantly on their children, and
Yeah.
they don't really love them, or they don't really want them around. Well, he was never like that. He loved his kids. He did everything for them. He tried to give them the best life that he knew how. It wasn't that he was, and this is the thing, is that he wasn't abusive. It's just that both of them, when they raised me, were
Yeah.
lacking in certain areas of knowledge to pass on. And
Yes.
unfortunately, my that area was social aspects and social, like, understandings and rules and how to act around other people. And that was my one of my major weaknesses when I went to school, is that I didn't know how to respond around other people, how to when somebody gives you something, or wants to do something like play. I didn't know how to respond in the correct manner. If someone was upset at me, I didn't know how to respond correctly to
Okay.
avoid escalating. All sorts of different areas, and
So stemming from how to be playful
or
to,
and how to be proper, and how to, like,
yeah, yeah, and
right.
what was, are you okay sharing a little bit about their background in terms of,
Sure.
why that was so difficult. It was something they never learned themselves and something they couldn't pass on to you or educate you about.
Yeah. Well, my my parents' families are quite opposites.
Mm.
My dad's side, they first off they both had large families.
Okay.
My dad's side, they were never really, well, they weren't poor, but they didn't have a lot of money, so they really struggled when it came to growing up.
Yeah.
The siblings, they always were fighting, always just, or like as kids, and fighting with each other, getting into trouble, uh, doing the best that they could with the knowledge that they had.
Yeah.
They grew up with an abusive father. Now, this he was like, from what I learned, he actually was. This wasn't like my dad, who was just
Yeah.
a bad temper, but
So
so they grew.
your
Yeah.
paternal grandfather was physically and emotionally abusive.
Yes.
Your father could be emotionally volatile, but he
Yeah.
was never physically abusive.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it all basically was trickling down. Like
Yeah.
he knew how to filter it out, but he didn't know how to correct
Oh,
the right. Like he didn't know how to change certain
yeah.
behaviors to show me, here's what you do with other children. Here's how you, when you
Yeah.
don't say something, like the rules of proper etiquette and social behaviors around
Yeah.
people and in groups and stuff. Like I never really learned
Well, I
the proper
actually
ways.
I really appreciate what you're saying because by the time a child is 8 years old, there's three things that they need to learn in life in order to be seen as successful.
Right.
One is to delay gratification, that if you do this now, you can have this later. Like
Yeah.
if you do your homework now, you can watch this later, or whatever it may be. Kind of like the marshmallow test, Walter Mischel. Uh,
Uh-huh.
the second thing is to play nicely and to get invited back, and to learn that way of playing nicely, sharing, grace, humility. But the third thing that really doesn't get talked about a lot is the art of rupture and repair. And a lot of times when there's a lot of conflict in the home, parents will conflict in public and make up in private. Or the role modeling of a repair, a relational repair after a rupture, it isn't taught to the child. And it's a very valuable life skill. So without these important social teachings of knowing how to move through the world, you felt ill-equipped for school, and you felt like it created tension with your peers. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of earned a reputation as like a roughhouse, someone who was hard to control.
Okay.
And it wasn't a hyper thing. It was just, I was I got, and it kind of plays into the whole ADHD thing now, that when I, more understanding of myself, but
Yeah.
I was never good at being focused in
Yeah.
school. I was always distracted by something. And so that played into it. And being the type of person that I was at a really young, like in my younger years of school, it all built into a reputation that I was not one to, get to know. Like I was kind of the outcast because I was different, and I was the oddball, or the one that was always doing weird things, and so they soon learned that I wasn't the kind of person that you wanted to hang out with. And kids being kids would always point that out. And I even witnessed in real time someone telling another person, why are you talking to him? He's like, literally, as I'm standing there waiting for pickup, I can hear them talking to each other and saying, why are you talking to him? I don't remember the whole thing, but it was literally like they were saying, he's not someone you should get to know. He's a loser. He's an idiot, or like. And I just remember feeling hurt because I'm going, that's not fair, like, no, you shouldn't be influencing somebody on some person just because you think you know them.
Well, that's so painful because you feel exiled by the whole group.
Yeah.
and judged for what sound like trauma related symptoms rather than the real you of, having your attention scattered everywhere or feeling like you don't fit in, but also feeling chronically fearful and on guard because you were being taunted. And for that to be prolonged over 12 years, it's just really amazing and impressive to me that you are where you are today doing what you're doing today, because
Yeah.
I'm sure that hearing some of the interviews that you've completed as your younger self would have found them deeply nourishing and would have known, I'm not alone in this painful experience of assimilate or be
Absolutely.
alienated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you were saying that you thought that the key memory was, you know, going back to the way it was with your father and the intrusion
Yeah.
trauma of peers, but
And
there was.
the reason that that was becoming more and more present in my mind at the
Mhm.
time was my partner. She was influencing this. Like she was, because we would always talk about when I'd have an issue or something would go wrong, we were talking about it, and it seemed like it was always leading back to him. And so I started to, like, it was like a slow transformation. I started to regret my
Mhm.
father in a way, like thinking that it was because of him that I am this way. And so I was blaming him and putting the fault on his behavior and his actions towards me, rather than realizing where the truth lies, like where the actual truth of this is. And what I and this is the part that I like was the most recent understanding and discovery that I've made, like throughout all this time here, is the my trauma and my CPTSD didn't really flourish until I was in this relationship.
Oh,
It was hidden, but it was under control. Like
yeah,
I was able to live my life
yeah,
perfectly fine. I had my friends. I was, I there were the moments when I would try to meet somebody or go out on a date, or I was interested in someone. I had moments where I just couldn't act,
yeah.
and right, but and I remember myself going over these and thinking it's because of the bullying. It's because I had so much bullying that I'm in real life now, and instead of giving it a fresh start, my memories come back from school, and I immediately go, I'm not worthy. This person's not going to like me because I'm not good enough. They're going to see me like all my classmates saw me, and so I was automatically beating myself down and never would try. And but I was happy. Like I even though I couldn't meet, I wasn't with anybody, I
Yeah,
was content.
yeah.
And then when I met her, it was like I felt, oh my God, I have a chance now to truly be a
Mhm.
person who can be open, can be nice, like loving and caring, and be honest, and not be afraid to discuss things with someone, because we care about each other. So we're going to be there for each other, and we're not going to, assault each other, or verbally abuse, or take advantage or manipulate. And so I was under this thought, I'll be fine, and this will be great. But the reality is that she was she was manipulative and verbally and emotionally abusive. And this is what made me just fall apart.
Yeah.
And it took such a long time, and by the end, and I was in a situation, and I know this is common, where people are to the point where they are really believing that there's nothing better out there. There's no anybody else out there is never going to accept them. This is the best you're going to find. So you might as well just live with it, and maybe they'll change, maybe they'll get better, and you'll be happy at some point. So I never, even though I believed that this was never going to go anywhere, and that I'm not going to, no matter what I do, it's not going to get better. I was stuck in this, behind this belief that if I end this, like she says, I'm not going to find anybody who's going to put up with like me and the things that I'm doing and all the chaos that I'm causing, which of course she's influencing and trying to get me to believe it, which it basically more almost did. And then when it finally ended, it was like just gigantic weight coming off me. Like I
What?
wasn't sad and I wasn't depressed and upset about it and crying and everything. I was actually relieved
Yeah.
because I'm like, oh my God, I'm finally free. I didn't have to do it, but it was finally done. I'm out of here. I don't have to listen to her anymore. I don't have to fight with her anymore. It's just I didn't know until months down the road that she was the cause of all my trauma.
Yeah.
Like it was because of her that I was so messed up that I had no ability to deal with conflict. Every time something happened, I would break down and I would lose my ability to communicate and make sense, which just drove her even more,
Mm-hmm.
enraged. And I never realized it until after that her because despite all her beliefs that she's healed from her trauma and her past, the reality is that she isn't,
Yeah.
and that she's also expressing and displaying a lot of her behaviors like from her parents. So it's like she's becoming her parents and
Mm.
now putting all that abuse onto her partner instead of realizing it and trying to fix it or trying to together make it better. She's just putting it all on me.
Well, it's really interesting what you brought up a few points. One was that from the school days and the bullying that took place,
Yeah.
there was this fear of initiating and these feelings of unworthiness that were
Yeah.
there, but they weren't amplified. And
Correct.
then when we look at complex PTSD, the theory that I used it in my book and it's in some of the research journals, is the diathesis stress model, which is an original vulnerability plus the onset of a lot of stress brings it out into the surface. And the relationship was very, very aggravating. It was the bite that fits the wound, and it
Yeah.
amplified a lot of those feelings of unworthiness. And at the time, you thought that it was kind of coming from your father, because it sounds like she was really honing in on that narrative. But
Yeah.
actually, the relationship was deeply wounding and aggravating for you. And in terms of what you've said about her, that she was reenacting the trauma of her early years by becoming the antagonizer, or what Freud would call the repetition compulsion. We repeat rather than remember. She was reliving it not as the um, the survivor, the victim, but as the antagonizer.
Yeah.
And that often does happen with the abuser, that they are reliving something. And that's why going into the roots of the trauma and rescuing, healing the earlier self, it helps you to love in a real and authentic way. So let me ask you this: what finally gave you the courage to leave that partnership? Because you said you immediately felt unburdened, but what was it that happened for you on the inside that gave you the readiness and the courage to leave an abusive partnership?
Well, it was only a few weeks before the end,
Okay.
and we had a lot of quiet, like we hadn't done a lot of talking, and besides hang like we used to always hang out together and like watch television or shows, or we'd always do everything together.
Mm-hmm.
And for a very long time, especially that summer,
Yeah.
we spent a lot of time apart
Mm-hmm.
because it was easier for us to be apart and only interact when we needed to,
Mm-hmm.
so that because we were both kind of in like had this inner fear that if we just interact as normal, that things are just going to fall apart. So we were trying to avoid it. And like I said, in December, we went out. I had a cousin who was having a birthday, and he had just moved into the city, and so we all went out, and she came along, and it was a really, for us, it was a really good night. We actually had a really good time, and there were moments of closeness and physical contact that had not happened in a very long time.
Yeah.
And we had, the next morning, we both had agreed that it was a really good night, and we both said that we both wanted that to continue.
Hmm.
So we kind of had like this moment where we thought, well, maybe things are getting better, maybe we're starting to improve.
Okay.
And literally about 2 days later, it was some very simple thing that I did, and
Yes.
completely unintentional. Obviously, you make a mistake making dinner, and she blew up at me,
Yeah.
and I, instead of being like if it was two adults who were perfectly fine, they'd resolve it as two adults. But because I'm getting triggered and I'm all like, oh my God, here I go again, and it's just, it's not getting better. It just keeps happening. I became like a child, and
Yeah.
I think I said something in a childish response that was like the child fighting back instead
Yeah.
of the adult going, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, okay, what can I do to make this better?" It was like a completely childish response, and she
Hmm.
got all upset, and we didn't talk for days after that. And in my mind, I'm going, "This is it's just like it clicked." And I'm going, "This is not going to get better."
Wow.
Because I tried, we
Yeah.
actually had a good moment, and all of a sudden something so insignificant,
Yes.
and in
Yes.
reality it was an insignificant thing,
Yeah.
caused a blow up, and here we are back at square one. And I'm going, this is just not going to go anywhere. We're never going to get better. And I immediately,
Yeah.
everything changed, like mentally and emotionally, things changed for me. And
Yeah.
I just was like, if she were to tomorrow say, I want this to be over, I wouldn't say, no, I don't want this to end. I would be like, all right, I understand.
That was a powerful realization. And what you said about the rupture in the kitchen, it sounds like for a long time there were systematic boundary violations. You felt like you were walking on eggshells,
Yeah,
and, and her eruption was disproportionate to the stimuli. And,
absolutely.
and then your response, your kind of younger self coming out in that traumatized way because it was activating the old wounds in you. you know, it was so deeply painful and re traumatizing that in that moment you kind of went within and decided, I can't keep going along this painful cycle anymore.
Yeah,
I feel trapped. I feel powerless. I feel like a prisoner. And that the power is in the present moment. And for you to kind of have that, you know, re epiphany of we're not, nothing's going to change here. I only have the power to change how I respond. I am collateral damage in her hurricane. I need to get out of the way and heal
yeah,
myself. That was very, very powerful. And I guess because you've disclosed that you've had two controlling abusive partnerships back to back, this cleansing period of coming home to yourself and connecting with your worthiness and your deservability and your lovability. Um,
yeah,
it's so important because
absolutely.
you accept the love that you believe you deserve, and taking this time for you, um, and taking the cleansing period in between partnerships, it helps you to choose wisely and with discernment. So
Yeah,
you should be very proud of yourself.
yeah. Well, thank you. I agree. The one thing that I've become really aware of is I have this very high desire to avoid making similar mistakes,
Okay.
because I remember when before the relationship had started, I had this very deep desire, and like I said to myself, I am going to do things different so
Okay.
that I don't have what happened in the past
Yeah.
repeat
Yeah.
itself now. But
Yeah.
it I wasn't able to truly act on what I said I was going to do.
Well, let me ask you this. If going back now with the practice wisdom that you've developed and knowing everything that you know now, going back to the springtime of that romance, is there anything at all that you would do differently in terms of the assessment process or noticing potential red flags? Is there anything that you would do differently with the practice wisdom that you now have?
Uh, I think I probably would have slowed down
Okay. You mean
because like
between
the
meeting and committing? Like there,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, because the way it was literally, it felt like it was a romantic movie with the perfect ending. That's how it started. Like everything felt perfect, right? Like she was always saying how I was the first person to do this and be that and everything, and I was like, and in my head I'm like, oh my god, she's perfect because she does this. Like it felt like it was the perfect match, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then learning about like the thing that really kind of alarmed me, but I didn't act on it, was the fact that she had been through a lot of trauma and a lot of her own pain and suffering.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that like every person who I come across that says I've had some kind of trauma, I'm just going to go, well, okay, no, I can't deal with that. But I
Yeah.
should have been more. I should have had some kind of awareness and slowed down the speed of to what we were moving forward, because I feel like if we could have taken our time a little more, we may have been able to see more, like see further beyond what we were seeing, and maybe it would have helped us decide, maybe this wasn't right. Maybe she needed to take more time. Maybe I just truly wasn't ready. Maybe we just kind of went with our emotions rather than within the logical and the thinking.
Well, I really like what you're saying. And, with love and romance, when you're attracted to someone, you kind of tend to amplify the parts of them that you want to see and blur out the parts you don't want to see.
Yeah.
And the eyes see what the heart wants them to believe. The advice that I give my clients that have a pattern of dating narcissists, not saying that your ex has any narcissistic tendencies, because I don't know her well enough to say that.
Yeah.
But there's often a grooming process in the beginning of the partnership where there's an idealization of you're the most, you're the best, you're amazing, basically making you feel like $1 million. And then around the 6 or 7 week spot on
Yeah.
clockwork, systematic boundary violations start coming, constructive criticisms about your appearance, your personality, people that you hang out with. And I ask them, don't make any big decisions until you cross that 6 to 7 week threshold. Listen for the boundary violations. And if everything continues to go smoothly and there's a stable, predictable, reliable sense of trustworthiness and emotional intimacy, and you continue to feel safe, then yes, slowly move together. So I like what you're saying. And I feel like with that practice wisdom that you have evolved and grown with in this painful experience, that
Hmm.
you can keep that at the forefront of your mind, even when you fall in love with someone and you're attracted to them, and try to keep that logical assessment, and you'll break this pattern with great success.
Yeah.
So I believe in you. I'm very proud of you. It's
Well, thank you.
it
Yeah.
actually
I
statistically takes 7 to 11 attempts to leave an intimate partner violent relationship. So,
Wow.
leaving is a big deal. And
Yeah.
incorporating a cleansing period is a big deal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess, see, I only have one fear.
Okay.
And when I think about it, I can see how it just makes sense to have it.
Okay.
But the fear I have is that I am going to be less willing to allow my emotions to come to play in a potential relationship, and I am going to miss the boat. Like instead of having it the right amount and going, okay, I like this person's nice, I like her, there's potential. I'm gonna I'm gonna sit on the sidelines too long and assess and think about it more than I should. And by the time that I feel like I'm ready to do the emotions and go forward, she's going to say, well, if you had tried 3 weeks ago, we'd be okay. But that kind of has passed, because to me, it felt like you weren't interested. And that's what I feel, is that I'm going to hold back too much.
Okay. Well, you're talking about the duty of care versus the dignity of risk, and striking
Right.
that balance. And how do you care for yourself, but also why is risking, take the time to get to know someone. And trust is built gradually over time through small, consistent acts. And it's all about assessing for shared life values, shared sense of humor, and the cumulative hours of harmonious contact. And even though you're not committing, let's say, like let's be partners, let's move in together, let's open a shared bank account, let's get a dog. Even though you're not jumping into that in the first 6 to 7 weeks, you could hypothetically say, let's go for a beautiful hike, let's go for a weekend away, let's do a day trip somewhere. The cumulative hours of harmonious contact, and that they're gently expanding, it shows that it is moving forward. It's just labeling it and committing very quickly and entangling your life around someone else while you're still getting to know them. That can
Right.
be precarious, but you can still balance that duty of care with the dignity of risk. And giving your heart to another person is always the greatest risk, but it also has the greatest reward. And you are the gatekeeper of your heart, and not to keep it to yourself, but to choose wisely. And you, over time, will incorporate that into your assessment process.
Yeah.
Um, any final thoughts or questions as we?
Um, yeah, actually there is one.
Yeah, of course.
I guess the thing I've I have always been, even today, I I do a lot of thinking, and it plays into my ADHD, unfortunately, so I have to live with that. But I do a lot of thinking, and often this plays against me, because I don't I have always been the one who, to others, I look like the type who is either mostly interested in talking about themselves, or has a hard time expressing like an honest reaction, whether it's a compliment, or saying somebody tells you a story, or gives you something, like tells you something about the day or what they're experiencing, and instead of giving an honest, real answer, it feels contrived, or it feels like you faked it, or that you're just trying your best to look like you know what you're doing. And so it you're worried that that person's looking at you going, does he really care, or is he just trying to get through this, or like, is he only obsessed about himself? Like, I've had that a lot of times, where I constantly am sitting here going, I am not sure what to say. And so I end up like saying, oh, okay, or I see, or instead of giving like an honest response that is has thought, and has empathy, or like shows sincere interest, it feels like it's just one of those, oh yeah, or okay. Like, I've always had that issue, and I really don't know how to go about working on overcoming this, or trying to make, have that less of a factor, less of a barrier, like.
And how do you want to make people feel? How do you want to make them feel in conversation with you?
I always want them to see and feel that I'm 100% wanting to listen to them, and to be helpful, or to be understanding, or empathetic. Like, that's how I always want to present myself.
And how would you demonstrate to someone that you're actively listening and understanding? How would you show that to them?
Well, See, that's the question, is I'm not 100% sure I know how
How
to
do you,
respond to that.
how do you know when somebody's actively listening to you? How can you tell?
Because there's a delay in how they what their response is, what they do. Um, if they're automatically giving you a response and there doesn't feel like there's any thought behind it, it feels like they're either just responding for the sake of trying to be polite, or they're not truly interested in what you're saying, and they're just trying to show that they're trying to pretend that they're being polite for the sake of not hurting your feelings.
Whereas when they really hear you, they take time to reflect on what you're saying, and
Yeah,
they give a thoughtful
yeah,
response.
yeah. And in that response, it's not just, oh, that's great to hear, or that's cool. There's also an intentional follow up,
Like
right?
they want to learn more. They're curious.
Yeah, yeah.
It sounds like you've answered your own question.
I know, it's putting it into play in real time. That's,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's the
and
key.
when you said before we started recording with your therapist friend that there's a beautiful cross pollination where you both make self disclosures. Obviously, there's an emotional intimacy and there's a safety on both sides of that relationship, that you are doing something really right, and you can bring all of those transferable skills of the platonic friendship into the romantic relationships, and know that you're already doing something really right when a friend is trusting you with their innermost insecurities and past experiences. You're already making them feel safe and heard and understood, because
Yeah,
people wouldn't open up to you unless they felt safe.
absolutely. Yeah,
So I just want to thank you so much for having me on.
absolutely.
um
You're
i
so welcome.
really I really love what you're doing, and I feel like from hearing you talk, your story, it's just such a story of triumph over adversity in terms of how far you've come and how you're turning your wounds into wisdom now with this podcast. And
Yeah,
I sincerely hope that you keep going because it's shining a light for others.
absolutely. I have had a number of people who have complimented me and that it has helped them.
Hmm.
So it is definitely being heard. That's good, and I'm very happy about that. I just want them to. I've always felt that there has never been enough of a voice out there.
Yeah.
Everybody, there's all these other areas of mental, like of health and well-being that is
Hmm.
represented, but there's such little that is known about like trauma and complex trauma, and there's very little out there for people to relate to, or to look at, or to look to get an understanding, or for help.
And you're filling that gap.
Yeah, doing my best that I can.
Well, keep doing the good work, and
Absolutely, thank you.
I'll be listening to your podcast. And
Excellent.
thank you so much for having me.
You too. I'm so happy that you came on. Thank you so much for being on my show.
Thank you. And I don't want to interfere with your recording. So how? And I've never used this software before.
Oh, I do it.
You do it. Okay.
Yeah,
All
I'll end it, and then that's good.
right. Perfect. Well, thank you so much again. And I hope you have a restful and restorative weekend.
Absolutely. You too. Okay. Thank you. All
Thank you.
right.
Bye.
Bye for now. Bye.